I walked into the office on Monday morning, holding a fresh cup of black coffee and feeling more relaxed than I had in months. The 3-day regional conference in Denver had gone exceptionally well. Our quarterly figures were solid, and we were ahead of schedule on our core deliverables. But the moment the elevator doors slid open on the 4th floor, the silence hit me. The usual Monday morning energy was gone. The East Wing corridor, where my team of 7 engineers worked, was quiet. I walked down the hall toward the glass-walled room we had occupied for the last 5 years. It was empty. The desks were cleared, the monitors were gone, and the whiteboards we used for brainstorming were completely wiped clean. Even the small potted fern that our QA specialist, Clara Hunt, kept on her desk was missing. Only the rectangular dust outlines on the carpet showed where our workstations used to be. I stood there, my coffee cooling in my hand, as Mark from facilities walked past with a stack of files. I stopped him and asked what happened to my team. Mark looked at me, his eyes shifting nervously, and said I should check the basement. They moved them all down there on Friday afternoon. At 58 years old, I have seen almost everything this industry can throw at a person. Before I joined Vanguard Solutions 8 years ago to lead Engineering Team B, I spent 15 years coordinating logistics in refugee camps during humanitarian crises. I have set up supply chains in mudslides, managed food distribution under armed guards, and built temporary hospitals with whatever scrap metal we could find. You do not survive that kind of work without learning how to read people and how to stay calm when everything around you is collapsing. When I transitioned to corporate life, I brought that mindset with me. I knew how to build a team out of people who did not fit the standard corporate mold, and I knew how to protect them. I took the elevator down to the basement. The doors opened to a dimly lit corridor, smelling of wet concrete and old paper. I walked past the boiler room and the cleaning supply closets until I found a heavy metal door with a piece of paper taped to it that read Engineering Team B. I pushed it open. My team was huddled around 3 plastic folding tables. The ceiling was low, with thick industrial pipes running overhead. Extension cords snaked across the damp floor like black vines. In the corner, water was dripping from a rusty pipe, landing with a steady metallic plunk into a blue plastic bucket next to Sarah Miller, my lead developer. Sarah looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She told me that Julian Cole, our department head, had come down with the facilities crew while I was in Denver. He told them they had 30 minutes to pack their personal belongings and move down here. When she protested, Julian told her that the company was expanding and needed the 4th floor space for a critical corporate asset. That critical corporate asset was Dennis Vance. I walked back up to the 4th floor to see the new setup. The spacious glass office that had housed our team was now occupied by a single man. He was young, probably under 30, wearing a tailored suit and carefully placing framed certificates on the desk. Julian Cole, who had been our department manager for just 5 months, was hovering nearby, practically beaming with pride. When Julian spotted me, he gestured for me to come in. He introduced the young man as Dennis Vance, their new productivity transformation specialist. Julian claimed that Dennis had developed a proprietary methodology that had increased engineering output by 300% at his last 3 companies. Julian then patted my shoulder and said my team would have to make do in the basement for the rest of the quarter until they could review the budget. Dennis did not even look up to shake my hand. He just kept adjusting his frames on the mahogany desk. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply nodded, told Julian I understood, and walked back down to the basement. My team was waiting for me. Harvey Stone, our senior hardware engineer who had been with the company for 28 years, was staring at his monitor, his hands shaking slightly. He muttered that he had given his entire career to this place, only to be shoved into a cellar like broken furniture. Ryan Cooper, our youngest developer, looked like he was about to pack his bags and quit on the spot. Alan Croft, our quietest programmer, who could code in 5 different languages but rarely spoke to people, was sitting silently in the corner, staring at the concrete wall. Jason Fowler, our security guy, was tracing the network cables, shaking his head at the terrible Wi-Fi signal. I looked at all of them. These were not just employees to me. They were the people I had hand-picked, Sarah was a genius with database architecture, but had been rejected by other firms because of her direct, unfiltered way of speaking. I saw her value and brought her in. Harvey was ready to retire early because he felt obsolete, but I knew his deep hardware knowledge was irreplaceable. Ryan was a brilliant kid from a state college who had been ignored by recruiters looking for Ivy League degrees. We had built a tight, efficient unit that delivered major projects on time, year after year, without asking for recognition. And now they were being humiliated. I closed the basement door and walked to the center of the room. I looked at each of them and smiled. I told them to start packing their bags. Not just their desk items, but everything they wanted to keep. I told them to do it quietly and not to say a word to anyone outside this room. Ryan looked confused and asked if we were quitting. I told him to trust me, to keep working on their current tasks, but to begin archiving all their personal files, their project documentation, and every line of code they had written over the past 5 years. I told them we were going to organize our knowledge base so thoroughly that not a single piece of our work would remain undocumented. They did not understand my plan, but they trusted me. My years in the humanitarian camps had taught me that when resources are scarce and the environment becomes hostile, you do not panic. You start building your exit strategy quietly, step by step, while the adversary is too busy celebrating their temporary victory for the next week. We worked from the basement. The dampness got to Harvey's joints, and the flicker of the cheap fluorescent lights gave Sarah a constant headache. But they kept their heads down. They documented our systems, archived our codes, and packaged our technical assets. Meanwhile, upstairs, Julian was telling everyone that Dennis was going to revolutionize Vanguard Solutions. He was setting up meetings with major clients, including Grayscale Solutions, promising them a demonstration of a new automated deployment system that would slash operational costs by half. What Julian did not know was that Dennis did not have a system. He had a slide deck full of buzzwords. To make his promises real, Dennis was going to need our team's code. He was going to need the proprietary automation engine that Jason and Alan had spent 3 years building for our infrastructure, and Julian was already planning to take it from us, without our permission. But I was already one step ahead of them. I had already reached out to an old colleague from my logistics days, Diana Ross, who now sat on the board of a major competitor. The chessboard was set, and Julian no idea he was playing. The basement was worse than uncomfortable. It was actively damaging our equipment. The humidity was so high that we had to wrap our backup servers in plastic sheets, and the air smelled constantly of mildew and wet cement. Every time the heavy industrial elevator down the hall moved, the folding tables we used for desks vibrated, but I kept my team focused. Following my instructions, they worked with quiet determination. We were not just doing our regular jobs, we were building an insurance policy. Alan Croft spent his days writing clean migration scripts for our database backups. Jason Fowler mapped out our entire security infrastructure, ensuring that every key configuration was stored in our private repositories rather than the company's servers. Clara Hunt created testing protocols so detailed that a child could follow them, but only if they had the access keys we held. I watched Ryan Cooper, our youngest developer, work on a script to clean up his local environment. He looked up at me one afternoon, his eyes tired under the dim fluorescent light, and asked why we were putting so much effort into documenting everything for a company that treated us like storage boxes. I told him that everything we do should be done with complete professional integrity. I explained that when you leave a place, you leave no room for them to claim you did a poor job. You leave clean code, clear instructions, and a perfect paper trail. The team listened, exchanging knowing looks. They still did not know the details of my discussions with Diana Ross, but they knew I had a plan. By the second week of our exile, Julian Cole decided it was time to show off his new star. He announced that the CEO, Eleanor Jenkins, and several members of the board would be attending a major quarterly review. The main event was supposed to be a presentation on our engineering achievements. For the past 3 years, I had delivered that presentation. I had already prepared the slides, detailing how our team had saved the company $400,000 in licensing fees by migrating to open-source databases. The morning of the meeting, I arrived in my best charcoal suit, Ready to climb the stairs to the executive boardroom, Julian intercepted me near the elevators. He had a smug smile on his face and his hands in his pockets. He told me there was a change of plans. He said the board wanted to hear about future innovations and productivity systems, not past maintenance metrics. He told me that Dennis Vance would be presenting instead. I looked at him, keeping my expression neutral, and pointed out that the CEO had specifically requested my presence to answer technical questions about the database migration. Julian shrugged, claiming he had spoken to Eleanor Jenkins that morning, and she agreed his new approach made more sense. He told me to go back to the basement and keep my team focused on their daily tasks. I did not argue. I did not show any frustration. I simply thanked him for the update, turned around, and went back down to the cellar. When I told the team, Sarah Miller almost threw her keyboard. She asked if we were just going to let that suit take credit for our work. I told her to remain calm. I told the team that sometimes you have to let people stand in the spotlight so everyone can see how poorly they perform under it. Later that afternoon, the office grapevine brought us the details of what happened in the boardroom. Dennis's presentation had been a complete disaster. He had filled his slides with complex diagrams showing productivity loops and synergetic workflows, but the board members, led by Eleanor Jenkins, wanted actual numbers. When a board member asked Dennis to explain the architecture of the new automated deployment engine, Dennis froze. He started mumbling about agile frameworks and scalability. When Eleanor Jenkins asked how his system would handle the legacy database integration, Dennis did not even know what database engine we used. He looked at Julian for help, but Julian, who did not know the difference between Java and JavaScript, could only offer nervous smiles. The meeting ended early, with the board demanding a detailed technical breakdown of the system within 48 hours. That evening, Julian Cole came down to the basement. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by a desperate, sweaty urgency. He walked over to my folding table, trying to look friendly. He told us that he had good news, that he was talking to facilities about moving us back to the 4th floor, though it would be in the smaller West Wing office rather than our old space. He then asked if we could write up a quick technical guide for the automated deployment engine. He claimed Dennis needed it to compile a report for the board. I looked at him and said we would be happy to help. I told him we would write up a document explaining our systems. Julian looked relieved, patted my shoulder, and left the basement. The moment the door shut, Sarah Miller turned to me and asked if we were really going to save Dennis's job. I smiled and told her we would write the document, but we would write it exactly as it was. We would explain the systems, but we would not provide the access keys, the custom library configurations, or the proprietary scripts that actually made the engine run. We would give them the theory, but not the machine. That night, I stayed late in the basement looking at the draft of the contract Diana Ross had sent me. Her firm, Vanguard's biggest competitor, was ready to fund a new engineering division. They wanted all 8 of us. They were offering double our current salaries, full benefits, and a modern lab with windows. The contract was sitting on my screen, waiting for my signature. But I was not ready to sign it yet. I wanted to make sure that when we walked out of this building, we did it in a way that ensured Julian Cole and Dennis Vance could never do this to another engineering team again. 2 days later, I invited Diana Ross to tour our facility. I timed our walk through the building perfectly, arriving on the 4th floor just as Julian Cole was hosting the executive team from Grayscale Solutions. Julian was desperate to close a licensing deal for the automated deployment engine, and he was using Dennis Vance to sell it. When Julian saw us, he waved us over, eager to show off his department's expansion. He introduced the Grayscale executives to Dennis, who immediately launched into his practiced pitch, boasting that his productivity systems had boosted efficiency by 300% in a single quarter at Northwest Technologies. Deanna listened, her face completely calm until Dennis finished. She then looked at him and said that was interesting because she sat on the board of directors at Northwest Technologies, and they had never recorded any such improvements. In fact, she noted that they had experienced major project delays during his tenure there and had eventually terminated his contract. Dennis's face went completely white. Julian stammered, claiming there must be some misunderstanding, but Diana simply looked at him with a cool, professional smile. I stepped forward and told Julian there was no misunderstanding. I announced that I had accepted a job offer from Diana Ross's firm the previous day and that I was taking my entire engineering team with me. I told him we would be starting at our new roles next Monday. Julian lost his temper. He pointed a finger at me, shouting that I could not take my team, that it was poaching, and that it was completely illegal. I looked at him and told him to check our contracts. None of us had signed non-compete clauses, but then I looked at Dennis and told Julian that poaching was the least of his legal worries. I reached into my folder and pulled out a document. I explained that the previous afternoon, Jason Fowler, our security specialist, had noticed a strange entry in our repository logs. Someone had uploaded a proprietary rights assignment agreement purporting to transfer all intellectual property rights of Team B's deployment engine to Dennis's division. The document had my signature at the bottom. I looked Dennis dead in the eye and told him that I had never signed that document. I explained that under California Penal Code, Section 470, forging a signature on a legal contract is a criminal offense which makes the entire agreement void ab initio. It was null and void from the very beginning. Julian tried to interrupt, but I kept my voice steady and clear, loud enough for the Grayscale executives to hear every word. I explained that because the transfer agreement was void, Vanguard Solutions did not legally own the rights to the deployment engine's code. I warned them that if Vanguard attempted to license this code to Grayscale Solutions, it would constitute federal copyright infringement under 17 U.S.C. Section 106, as well as a violation of the Defend Trade Secrets Act under 18 U.S.C. Section 1836. The Grayscale executives did not need to hear anything else. They immediately began gathering their notebooks and tablets, apologizing to Julian and saying they would have to postpone any further licensing discussions indefinitely. They walked out of the conference room, leaving Julian, Dennis, and me alone. Dennis sank into his chair, staring at the floor. Julian's face went from flushed red to a sickly gray. He looked at me, his voice cracking, and asked what I wanted. He offered to match Diana's salary offers, promising to move my team back to the 4th floor immediately. I looked at him with the same calm smile I had carried since finding my team in the basement. I told him it was too late. I explained that when he put my team in the basement, he showed us exactly how much he valued our contributions. I told him that in my refugee camp days, I learned that true character is revealed when resources are tight and environments are harsh. He had failed that test completely. I walked out of the room, leaving Julian standing there in silence. When I returned to the basement, my team was waiting anxiously. I closed the door, checked the room, and told them it was done. I explained that Diana Ross had finalized the offers, giving everyone double their current salaries and a clean, modern workspace. The basement erupted. Ryan Cooper let out a shout of joy, and Harvey Stone looked like a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. They began packing their boxes with newfound energy, laughing and joking for the first time in weeks, but as I watched them, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Eleanor Jenkins, the CEO. She wanted to see me in her office at 9 Lion the next morning. Just me, without my team. I knew this was not going to be a simple exit interview. Eleanor Jenkins was a sharp, calculating executive. She had stayed out of Julian's way for 5 months to let him implement his plans, but losing an entire engineering team and facing a major intellectual property scandal would force her hand. I went home that night and spent hours reviewing our documentation, preparing for whatever Eleanor was going to throw at me. I knew that the next morning would decide the final outcome of the game we had started. Eleanor Jenkins's office occupied the top corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. She sat before a dark oak desk, reviewing a stack of printouts as I walked in. She gestured to the leather chair across from her and told me to sit. She did not waste time with small talk. She stated that she had spent the previous evening reviewing my team's metrics and delivery logs for the past 5 years. She noted that we had been the most consistent division in the company, operating on less than half the budget of the other departments. I thanked her and said my team was exceptional. She agreed, then asked why we were all resigning at once. She said she found it hard to believe, that a simple office relocation to the basement was enough to make a veteran lead like me walk out with 7 engineers. I looked her in the eye and told her it was not about the basement itself, but what the basement represented. I explained that when Julian Cole moved us down there to make room for Dennis Vance, he was sending a clear message about how the company valued our years of service. I told her that the basement was the physical proof of how management viewed our worth. Eleanor leaned back, asking if I believed she shared that view. I answered honestly, pointing out that she had approved Dennis's hiring and the resources allocated to his division without any real due diligence. So yes, I had assumed she supported Julian's decisions. To my surprise, Eleanor let out a short, dry laugh. She explained that Julian had the backing of several key board members who wanted a quick fix for our productivity numbers. She said she had been outvoted and had to let Julian try his methods, but she admitted that losing my team was a price she was not willing to pay to let him fail. She slid a thick blue folder across the desk. She told me it was an offer to keep my team at Vanguard Solutions. She proposed creating a new, independent department reporting directly to her, bypassing Julian Cole completely. The terms were outstanding: a 15% raise above Diana Ross's offer, full autonomy over our projects, and an immediate relocation back to the 4th floor East Wing. For a second, I felt my resolve shake. This was everything we had worked for: respect, resources, and recognition. It was a perfect corporate victory. But as I held the folder, I remembered what my years in logistics had taught me. Never depend on a single supplier and never put all your assets in one basket. If we stayed, we would still be vulnerable to the next political shift on the board. If we left entirely, we would be starting from scratch in a new company, bound by new corporate structures. I told Eleanor I needed to discuss the offer with my team. She agreed but stated she needed an answer by the end of the day, because the board of directors was meeting at 9 the next morning. I walked back down to the basement, the blue folder under my arm. My team gathered around the folding tables as I laid out the terms of Eleanor's offer. The room went silent. Harvey Stone looked torn, noting that he had 28 years of history here and did not really want to start over at a new firm if we could stay on better terms. Jason Fowler, however, was skeptical, arguing that they only value us now because we were walking out the door. Sarah Miller pointed out that we had already given our word to Diana Ross. I sat on the edge of the table and told them we had a unique opportunity. I proposed that we should not choose between the two offers. I suggested we split the team. They stared at me in disbelief. Ryan Cooper asked if I was breaking up the team. I explained that it was a strategic split. I proposed that 4 of us, including Harvey and Clara, would stay at Vanguard to run the new division under Eleanor Jenkins. The other 3, including Sarah and Ryan, would join Diana Ross's firm as planned. I explained that we would maintain our connections, share technical insights, and collaborate on joint projects between the two companies. By doing this, we would create our own independent network. Neither company would ever have complete leverage over us, again because we would have footprints in both. If one company tried to mistreat us, we could easily move the remaining members to the other side. Sarah Miller started to laugh, shaking her head. She called it brilliant, noting that we were turning a corporate demotion into our own industry network. The rest of the team quickly caught on, discussing who would stay and who would go, and how we would coordinate our systems. I then stepped out of the basement to make 2 phone calls. First, I called Eleanor Jenkins, presenting our split team proposal. I told her we would stay only if we could collaborate on joint development projects with Diana's firm. Next, I called Diana Ross, explaining the strategy. Both women were sharp enough to recognize the value of a collaborative partnership between their firms, and both agreed to the terms. When I returned to the basement, I told the team that the agreements were set. But I added that we had one final task. I told them that the board meeting was at 9 tomorrow morning, and we needed to prepare a presentation that would ensure the board understood exactly why this split was happening and what Julian Cole's management had cost the company. We spent the rest of the night in the basement, compiling data, formatting logs, and preparing our folders. We were not just leaving a job, we were rewriting the rules of the game. The boardroom doors opened at exactly 8:55. My team and I walked in, carrying our folders, and took our seats opposite Julian Cole and Dennis Vance. Julian looked shocked to see us, his hand pausing as he arranged his papers. Dennis sat beside him, staring at his tablet and looking uncharacteristically quiet. At the head of the table sat Eleanor Jenkins, and 3 seats down was Diana Ross. The other 8 board members, all dressed in formal business suits, watched us enter with curiosity. Julian stood up to start his presentation. He clicked through his slides, showing colorful graphs, and talking about how Dennis's new productivity systems would revolutionize Vanguard Solutions, predicting a 200% output increase by the end of the year. He claimed that the transition was going smoothly with only minor adjustments in space allocation. Eleanor Jenkins interrupted him, asking if by space allocation he meant moving our entire core engineering team to the basement. Julian shifted on his feet, his collar suddenly looking very tight. He claimed it was a temporary measure to maximize department efficiency during the transition and that plans to renovate a new space were already underway. Eleanor then asked if those renovations only began after he learned that the entire team had resigned. Julian's face flushed red, and he struggled to find words. Eleanor turned to me and asked if I could give the board our perspective. I stood up and gestured to my team. We opened our folders and distributed our documents to the board members. I explained that what they were looking at was a complete data-backed analysis of the department's operations over the last 5 years. I pointed out that the document proved that our team, while working with less than half the budget of other divisions, had been responsible for 78% of the company's successful software deliverables. One of the board members frowned, looking at Julian, and asked why they were risking the resignation of a team that carried the bulk of the company's technical output. But I was not done. I told them to turn to page 12 of the document. I explained that this was a background report on Dennis Vance. I pointed out that the records showed Dennis had been terminated from Northwest Technologies for major project failures, and that his previous employer before that had settled a class action lawsuit regarding his practices. Dennis stood up, shouting that this was private information and that we had no right to share it. I looked at him calmly and stated that all of these court records and settlement filings were public. I added that Dennis's alleged productivity methodology had failed at all 3 of his previous companies, leaving 2 of them bankrupt. I then addressed the board chairperson, explaining that Julian Cole and Dennis Vance had tried to secure a licensing agreement with Grayscale Solutions. By using our team's automated deployment engine, I revealed that they had uploaded a proprietary rights assignment agreement with a forged signature under my name to make it look like our code belonged to Dennis's division. I explained that under California Penal Code Section 470, the forgery made the transfer contract void ab initio. It was null and void from the very beginning. Therefore, Vanguard Solutions did not own the legal rights to license the code to Grayscale. I warned them that if the company proceeded with the license, they would face massive federal copyright infringement liabilities under 17 U.S.C. Section 106, as well as trade secret theft claims under 18 U.S.C. Section 1836. The room fell completely silent. The board members stared at Julian and Dennis. Julian looked as if he was about to pass out, and Dennis slowly sat back down, saying nothing. The board chairperson asked me why we were bringing this information to them now if we were already planning to leave. I smiled and said that we cared about the company's future, and we wanted to show them that there was a better way to operate. I had Owen Perry distribute our second proposal. I explained that instead of a complete resignation, we were proposing a strategic split. Under the plan, 4 of our team members would stay to run a new independent department at Vanguard, reporting directly to Eleanor Jenkins, while 3 members would join Diana Ross's firm. The 2 teams would collaborate on joint development projects, creating a powerful network that benefited both companies. Diana Ross spoke up, confirming that her board fully supported the partnership and believed it would set a new standard for the industry. The board chairperson nodded slowly and asked my team and me to step out so they could discuss the matter privately. 3 hours later, as my team and I were celebrating at a nearby restaurant, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Eleanor Jenkins. She informed me that Julian Cole and Dennis Vance had been fired immediately to avoid further legal liabilities. She added that the board had approved our split team proposal and wanted to know when I could start as the director of the new division at Vanguard. I typed back my response, stating that I would start next Monday, dividing my time between Vanguard and Diana's firm as agreed. When I told the team, they erupted in cheers. Harvey Stone raised his glass, toast to the basement that had started it all. 6 months later, our collaborative model was featured in major industry publications as a massive success. Innovation was up, burnout was down, and both companies saw their stock prices rise. Julian Cole ended up at a small IT firm in a junior role, and Dennis Vance was back to selling empty consulting packages to companies that did not know any better. As for us, we no longer worked in any basement. We had bright, airy offices at both firms, and our work was respected. We had built a system where what they did to us could never be done to anyone else. If you have ever been undervalued at work or pushed aside for a flashier hire, drop a comment below. I would love to hear your story. And if you enjoyed this tale of corporate justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more.